Thank you all. Please welcome back Jonathan Jakubowicz.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you. Is it on?
Hello, hello, hello.
It's on. Thank you for this film. I'm going to jump right into what I think is, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to cover here. I'm sure we'll find many things to disagree about. But I believe it was brought up here at the beginning, too. One of the things that struck me the most about this film, and I've seen a lot of films on similar topics, and each one says, no, we're here, we're not taking one side, we're here to show both sides, and nobody does that successfully. And I want to say that this was one film where I was sitting there, I'm like, I don't know where he's coming from here. I don't know, what's his agenda? What is he going? Is he trying to make them look good, trying to make them look good? And I think you do a really good job in showing both sides in this film. Tell us a little bit about how you approach that.
Well, I think part of the reason is because I was genuinely curious about both sides. You know, my relationship to the State of Israel has always been of affection, and that includes both sides. You know, I feel that the Haredim praying at the Western Wall or the ravers partying in Tel Aviv are my people in the same way, and I care about both sides, and I have never heard such level of division as I started hearing in the January in 2023. My mother lives in Tel Aviv. She did Aliyah about 17 years ago. And for 16 years, she only spoke beautifully about every single aspect of Israel. And then suddenly she started talking like the way we used to talk in Venezuela. You know, these people want to destroy the country. These people are against us. These people are our enemies. And at first I was like, yeah, you guys just have too much peace and want to fight each other. But then I realized it got serious, and I genuinely wanted to understand, you know, what was behind the thinking of both sides. And I literally wrote that letter to the people that we interview, and it's probably why we were able to get those interviews, saying my country, Venezuela, was destroyed because of polarization. I don't want to see that happen in Israel. I told them I was the distant cousin that moves to the house to see if he can help the couple before they get a divorce. And they were willing to talk to me. Some of them were very curious about how I saw it, coming from a place that actually had an erosion of democracy. So I was genuinely interested in both sides and in helping both sides understand each other, also because I didn't see that they were as far as they were making it sound. And I have also just gone through the Trump first period where a lot of vitriol and a lot of division was happening in the United States. I live in California, half my family live in Florida, so I'm always in between people telling me how the other side are their enemies. And, you know, I think the reason it's objective is because it's genuinely objective. I'm not pretending to just be curious and are trying to give a fair shake to everybody. I genuinely believe that, you know, people need to talk.
I couldn't agree more. I think it is something that's been lacking. I mean, it goes back a few years, but even since October 7th, especially possibly since October 7th, we've seen the divide both outside of the Jewish community, but within the Jewish community, of no room for conversation. Has this film is going to be shown mainly, I'm guessing, to a Jewish community. Has it gone beyond the Jewish community?
Well, we were lucky to sell the film to a distributor. This is the third audience that watches it, and we are definitely starting with the Jewish community, but it's going to be in theaters for every audience to watch. Our hope is that this is the kind of film that Jews want to show their non-Jewish friends. So we're trying to gather people who are allies to then tell 5 of their non-Jewish friends, I'm not going to talk about Israel anymore, just watch it, you know, because I feel like it explains a lot of what we've been trying to explain. And, you know, it's been very difficult for films on this subject to be bought, to be distributed. Everybody's afraid of the subject no matter what. But we were lucky that we actually ended up with a great distributor, so it's going to hopefully be seen by a lot of non-Jews eventually.
I hope so. The film, another striking element of the film, of course, are just the access. I mean, you mentioned that you wrote them a letter, but you really, heads of state and people from all sides. It's almost like this film brings everybody together. I don't think any of them ever sat in the same room, but if you were the point of contact, you've created this. You've managed to speak to really the full spectrum of Israeli politics. How did that come about? How did you manage to really get so many influential people?
I mean, we started approaching everybody. At the beginning, it was very tough. We were lucky that Tzipi Livni received us very early on and took me to a protest. And then she took a picture with me and tweeted from the protest, international filmmaker is here to make a documentary about the protest. I don't think she knew who I was, but she wanted her people to feel that that was an important thing to encourage the protest. But what happened was that everybody wanted to meet with me after that. If he's talking to Tzipi Livni and she's saying he's very important, I'm not going to Google who he is. Let's just talk to the guy. And so we tricked everybody into thinking we were very important. But and when we started building, okay, we have enough people from the right, we need someone from the left, we need Arabs, we need this, so we started building and pursuing people, and sometimes we, approach 4 different people and of the same, camp and got one, and that was enough to fill that color. And a lot of the people we interviewed said, who you need to talk to this guy. Let me pick up the phone, and they will call them. And Israel at the end of the day it's like a JCC. It really is. Like at some point, my wife has half the government on her WhatsApp. My wife produced the film, and yeah. And at some point it was very informal, like you call anybody, you email anybody, no response. You send them a WhatsApp, you get probably Bibi.
It's all WhatsApp these days. It's really, I don't know where the lines are. Like, why is this person WhatsApping me? And you have to leave them voice messages too. You can't just send them text. You have to actually send them a voice message so they listen to you. I want to ask you. You're coming into this with this more objective perspective. What did you learn? Were there any sides from when you came in through this process? Were there any sides that suddenly surprised you and enlightened you in ways that you didn't have to begin with? That really surprised you?
I mean, I learned so much. I mean, a lot of what you see in the documentary, I didn't know. Like people say, wow, I learned so much. I had no idea you knew so much. No, I didn't. It's like we think we understand Israel. But if you haven't lived there, if you don't know that the majority are not Ashkenazi, if you don't know about the history of underrepresentation of the Sephardic, the fact that the Likud is a Sephardic-driven party, I honestly didn't know. I didn't, because you see Menachem Begin, the guy, doesn't particularly, he's not Sephardic, he's survived World War II. So everything was a big learning experience, and it was also very strange of an experience at the beginning, because we are used to associate the flag of Israel with this image of what defends us from our enemies, never as a tool from people protesting against the Israeli government. I remember the first time I saw Bibi arrived in London to be welcomed by a bunch of Israeli flags protesting him. I think he was like, whoa, I mean, this is new, but it was crazy. It was crazy for all of us. And to be singing Hatikva in the middle of Kaplan with 100,000 people who are protesting the Israeli government, it really moved you in ways that you didn't think was even possible. And it just made me feel that Israel is a real country. It's not this idealistic thing that we have been taught from school, that this is the country that, was created in order to save us from the Holocaust. I mean, it's a real country with real problems. with problems that are in a way, more similar to the rest of the world than you realize. A lot of the stuff that they're discussing there, like identity politics and race, and it's the same stuff everybody talks about in most of the world. It is very specific in Israel, but it's really the same conversations. So it was a very intense learning process, and obviously, when October 7 happened is when we realized what documentary we were making, because we thought we were making one about the judicial reform, but it was, everybody kept telling us, you're never gonna find a third act. As we were making it, they were saying this is never gonna end. We're gonna keep fighting forever. It turns out it's the worst possible third act you could imagine, but we found it, and it was so clear. Not when it happened. When it happened, I remember calling Eitan, our executive producer, who helped us from the beginning, and I told him, I don't know, man, maybe we just lost a lot of money. I don't know if there's a documentary here. But after crying for a month, my editor, Santiago, who's also here, who's not Jewish, has never been to Israel, told me, I think now you have a documentary. This is the documentary you were making. And it took a while, but, we found it, and it's very clear that sometimes you think the message is something, but, the story makes the message more important, because from the beginning we were making a movie about the danger of division. We just didn't realize how dangerous it was. But the events only made the interviews we had conducted prior to the event more relevant and more important.
Okay, I have a lot more to ask, but I want to give a chance for the audience to ask some questions. I'll ask one more question, and then we'll get to the audience. Media. I feel like this film is also making a very strong statement of how media influences our opinions, and you're doing that through media, of course. So I'd like to know a little bit of this of what is your hopes that this film will do for an audience in terms of how it will figure out how to listen to media at this point.
I mean, I don't have ambitions to, have people react to media. If at this point in history you don't realize that every single media you consume is just a version of events, you haven't been paying attention. It is. I'm a journalist by education. I studied journalism, and it's always been clear to me that you have to listen to both sides and come up with your own conclusion, and know it's still probably wrong. But what I hope is that the conversation can be had about the reality. If you hate Jews, if you hate Israel, at least hate them for the right reasons. You don't come up with some imaginary Israel that has nothing to do with reality, and because then it's boring, like we can't even talk. And I hope information that is contained in this film can help elevate the conversation. We screen it. We did test screening some, people on different sides, and we even showed it to extreme left Spanish people who, you could consider technically anti-Semites. And at the beginning, they were mad at the documentary and, wanted to throw things at the screen, but then as it got into the women's rights issue and all that stuff, they inevitably started identifying with half of Israel. So by the end of the documentary, they only hated half of Israel.
Success.
If you can turn an anti-Semite into a medium rare, you did good.
We got a microphone. We'll take some questions, and let's try to keep the questions concise and really questions. So we'll start here.
Try to be concise. Great film. Okay. Now that it's been done, do you anticipate maybe doing the second edition in light of what all these crazy proposals that are coming out of Trump and other people in terms of addressing the current situation and how it will evolve? And, sorry, I've got a scratchy throat. And do you, when was that moment where you said, all right, now we know we have an ending. Now, how do we manage it? What did you do to figure out that way that you could say it without knowing that it was still going on and there were things that were unresolved?
Yeah, I mean, I hope I don't have to do part two. I really don't want another third act. And in regards to the Trump proposals, we just saw a movie about Jewish unity. I feel like if I start talking about Trump, Jewish unity is gonna walk out of the room. When did I know? When the Supreme Court struck down the judicial reform, and there were no protests. You have to understand what that meant for us. Who's like for months saw an entire nation mobilized in the street because of the judicial reform, and it was so unimportant when they stopped it because of the war that I knew that was the day the story of the documentary had to end. Because it really showed that it was all for nothing. Like when you compare real enemies to your neighbors, you suddenly realize and put into perspective what matters and what doesn't.
Got a question up there.
Hi there. I was so glad to hear that you're planning to share it with other theaters to have non-Jews watch it. And I just checked my phone and I saw that seems to be available on Hulu now.
Not that I know of.
We hope not.
I went to the app IMDb and I typed in the name and it talks about, I believe, a blurb about what it's about, and Soul of a Nation's right there.
Do you want to share a little bit about the plans for the release of the film?
I mean, it's definitely on IMDb. As far as I know, unless that happened this morning, it hasn't sold to Hulu.
He would know.
I hope. It's first going to be in theaters, and after theaters, it will be in one of the platforms or many of the platforms. There isn't a specific plan just yet. The market is happily changing. Up until very recently, when you started saying I have a documentary about Israel, they just hang up the phone. I think people are more open now to understand what happened, and the documentary just won Audience Award in the Miami Jewish Film Festival, which Audience Award gives you a little bit of okay, people don't hate it, and it also gives non-Jews the feeling that at least the Jews don't hate it, because if you were starting a documentary that shows so much vitriol and so many controversial things from specific Israeli politicians, some people ask, what if it's accused of anti-Semitism? What if it's accused of anti-Islam? Like there's so many minefields that you can step on when you take on this subject that everybody's afraid of it. But, happily, with the work that we're doing, it's going to start growing and reach all audiences.
Let's be clear that it's not enough to win the Miami Jewish Film Festival. You then have to win the LA Jewish Film Festival to balance it out. We'll take one more question right up here.
You really set this up very well as to what happened. How do you feel about Netanyahu? There's a lot of feeling that did he drop the ball intentionally in terms of security, you might think? Or, listen, having Israel secure, the judicial reform went away and the opposition to him went away. Whether it was done intentionally, I mean, it would be remarkable to think, or terrible to think, that he did that intentionally. How do you feel about his role into what had happened and to the future of, obviously it went away?
I think the level of responsibility will be determined when there is an investigation. I wouldn't dare reach conclusions about that either way or the other because I don't have any information. The notion that in any way it was on purpose is completely absurd. Nothing has hurt Netanyahu's political career more than October 7. You know, it's become his legacy. Doesn't matter what happened afterwards, if there is a Riviera in Gaza or not. His legacy is this, and there's no. And Israel is also a very different country from most of the world in the sense that the security cabinet sends their children to the war. You know, like the son of Gadi Eisenkot, who was in the security cabinet and was making the decision of the war, was killed in Gaza. You know, it's not Don Jr., you know, like it's people who, so you don't take the decision to go to war when you're sending your children based on political calculations.
Should we take one more? Let's take one more. We got one in the middle there. Thank you, Caroline.
Hi, I'd like you to be a psychologist for a moment. My daughter, who's an American, is married to an Israeli Mizrahi, and they've decided that for 3 reasons, maybe many more, I am unacceptable. Reason number 1, I read the New York Times. Reason number 2, my husband volunteers to teach medical students at Columbia University. That's been not been nice to Jewish students, shall we say. And reason number 3, I belong to a synagogue where the rabbi actually recognizes that not all Palestinians are horrible. And so I wonder, here's where you come in as a psychologist. If I ask them to see this film, will it help or make things worse?
This is a first, by the way. We've seen a lot here.
I think it will help because the film inevitably invites to see the other side and invites people to wonder if they are being manipulated into intolerance. I think the key to, and I am actually a psychoanalyst. If the key to these conversations is compassion. And I think what you should think about is the compassion that you need to feel in front of people for whom the elements that you mentioned feel like an attack. You know, there is a group of people, a group of us who are very sensitive right now and who have generational trauma, who have literal trauma, and who have seen things in the last 15 months we never thought possible. And some of us react better, some of us react, very reserved. And I think just as they should be generous enough to understand where you're coming from, you should try to understand why is it that their pain is about, and maybe, hear them out and perhaps not mention a few things in front of them at the beginning, because they're sensitive. It's life and death, and people have the right to be afraid.
Thank you. We have solved not only Middle East conflicts here, but actually the world peace. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks, for joining us. And please join us for more. Coming up, we have a lot of exciting films. Tell your friends. Let them know about this film as well. And have a good night. Get home safe.